A very good morning to all. Ashley, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Thank you, and a very good morning to all. I welcome all for today's training workshop, which is on building municipalities and citizen awareness for resilient India. So this training workshop is being jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, with All India Local Self-Governance and Foundation EMDA Southasia and Urban Update. So this program is a part of the series of webinars and this is the third program. Yes, sir.
It's okay. Please go ahead.
This is the third program and the second training workshop that have been conducted over this series. And today's training workshop is on building municipalities and citizen awareness because as we are all aware that India ranked third on the list of the countries recording the highest number of natural disasters over the last 20 years. And with the impacts of climate change and rapid urbanization, the disaster risks are predicted to be further increasing over the years. These risks are also going to get more complex in urban and peri-urban areas due to presence of high concentration of population and critical infrastructure. With these issues pertaining in our surroundings, it is very crucial for us to build awareness in the municipalities and other urban local bodies, as well as to the citizens who are residing in those urban areas to build their awareness so they can actively participate in the DRM activities. Has been conceptualized and organized. So the program has been conceptualized under guidance of Major General Manoj Kumar Vindal, Executive Director of NIDM, and Mr. Ravi Ranjan Guru, Deputy Director General of All India Local Self-Governance. This program is convened by Professor Santosh Kumar, Head of Governance Inclusive DRR Division, NIDM, who would be joining us shortly, and Mr. Gagan Sinha, Mr. Gagan Sinha. And with this, I welcome all the dignitaries of today's training workshop. Shri Anil Sinha, former Vice Chairman of BSDMA, Dr. A.S. Nair, who is a Senior Emeritus Scientist, and Dr. Amit Proti, who has been the Regional Director of Global Resilient Cities Network. Today, in this training workshop, we will be focusing majorly on three modules. The first module is community engagement, which would be majorly talking about tools for effective communication with the community, which will be taken by our first dignitary, Shri Anil Sinha, former Vice Chairman, BSDMA. The second session is on accessing technological tools and resources for disaster management, would be taken by Dr. A.S. Nair. And the third is on policy interventions and compliances at local level for making cities safe, which would be taken by Dr. Amit Proti.
Sir. Good morning, sir. My name is Abhishek. I'm the editor of Urbanization magazine. So I am on behalf of All India Institute of Local Self-Government, and I am representing.
Okay, please go ahead. Abhishek, please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Is Mr. Guru joining?
Sir, he is joining in a while. I just spoke to him, so he'll be joining in a while.
Okay. Your magazine's name is Urban Update?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Kindly include my email also so that I start getting the.
Definitely, sir. We will include your name, and also we'll request you to write for us. And we are bringing out. So, firstly, I would like to speak about All India Institute of Local Self-Government, so that all our attendees know, because this is the third workshop or webinar in the series. So All India Institute of Local Self-Government is working in the domain of urban development and hand-holding urban local bodies for last 90 years almost. So we will be completing 100 years in 1926. So All India Institute of Local Self-Government is based in, the head office is based in Mumbai. We have approximately 45 regional centers across India. We have a strong presence in Gujarat and Maharashtra. We are working with international agencies like European Union, World Bank, and also with the National Institute of Urban Affairs, Ministry of Urban Affairs. We are working in different states, for this matter, housing for all. We are working in your state also. In Bihar, we are supporting the state government in implementing housing for all scheme. And we are implementing Girl Power project that is sponsored by the European Union. What we are trying to do in the state of Jharkhand, we are empowering women self-help groups so that they can market their local products online and they can market globally also. We are creating a marketplace, online marketplace for them. And in the field of disaster management, we have a separate cell in our Mumbai head office, disaster management cell. So through which we are working in different states. We are training municipal officials, elected representatives, and also in the South Asia, in Asia Pacific region. We are working with United Cities and local governments, Asia Pacific, in which we are training elected representatives in Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and also in collaboration with local government associations like Municipal Association of Nepal, Municipal Association of Bangladesh, and also the institutions like AIIDM. So our presence in Asia Pacific is quite large. So I think this is the basic introduction of All India Institute of Local Self-Government. And when our Deputy Director General joins, so he will speak more about our activities. I can tell you more about what Urban Update is doing. Urban Update is publishing articles on climate change, in disaster management, been supporting urban local bodies, elected representatives, and all these stakeholders in urban domain to empower them to how to work according to the global agendas like Paris Accord, or whether it is Sendai Framework, or whether it is a new urban agenda that was discussed in Kyoto. So these are all the activities that All India Institute of Local Self-Government is doing in different regions of Asia Pacific and also in different states of India. So over to you, Mohana, and I think when Mr. Ravi Guru joins, I will text you and I will inform our esteemed attendees and the speakers, prestigious speakers about this.
Professor Santosh Kumar sir has also joined. Yes, sir. Anil sir, you were saying something.
Abhishek, can you just tell me a little bit of the role of NIUA, National Institute of Urban Affairs, as compared to your role?
National Institute of Urban Affairs has launched several initiatives. So with our presence, since All India Institute of Local Self-Government is working with elected representatives specifically for last 90 years, so we have good reach. And with NIUA, we are suppose like NIUA is doing implementing NULP, National Urban Learning Platform. So All India Institute of Local Self-Government is supporting in making these modules and training these officials according to their agenda. So All India Institute of Local Self-Government is kind of a implementing agencies. I think, sir, about all these things, I will speak to you separately. Professor Santosh Kumar from National Institute of Disaster Management has joined us. So I will request Professor Mohana to take over and introduce Professor Santosh Kumar.
Yes, definitely. So sorry for the technical glitch. So Professor Santosh
don't
Kumar,
introduce me, I will introduce myself.
Yes, Professor Santosh Kumar was just due to some technical issue, he couldn't join us earlier. So over to Santosh Kumar sir, he will introduce and start.
Good morning, everyone, and especially Sinha Saab sir, who is here. And I'm there since beginning, where sir has said that this is a disaster. I totally agree, because we didn't have this. I was into this attendees link, so I could not intervene when I wanted to speak. So just I wanted to share now. I have been given the link of this panelist, so I can speak now. Other two disasters which I am facing on the way, one is the Kisan Andolan, where the route is diverted all over, so I'm not been able to make it. But since beginning, I am there. So first of all, let me apologize for not being there as a kind of a panelist, so that I would have welcomed you, all the panelists and sir. On behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, I take this opportunity to welcome once again to all of you and my sincere apology for the initial glitches. Uh, Coming to this particular program, which we, NIDM with All India Local Self-Government, jointly organizing, has organized this program and also the other two programs which we had in the past. The idea is to reach out to the local government capacity building. So local government capacity building, there is no best institution or better institution than All India Institute of Local Self-Government. Those who are working always with the this local government in the urban area. NIDM also had this collaboration way back in the year, say 2007, 2008 with them. Thinking this that how the capacity and the new learning which is happening and our local bodies' strengths are further enhanced. So with this objective, this was the program which we are into today. And we are trying to discuss some of the issues which is getting linked in the context of climate change, sustainable development goal and DRR. Ultimately, everything boils down to the local government in the urban area, that local bodies, and in the rural area is the panchayat. All these are not new thing. People have been debating, and that is why people are saying that this is important and to be taken. But unfortunately, we do not have any specific program designed where the local capacity is built by any state government. Many state government are taking initiatives, small initiatives, but comprehensive initiatives so far have not been taken. The idea is to, in the light of 15th Finance Commission, where the capacity development initiatives are being promoted, that how different agencies who are involved can actually think of taking such programs to the local level. So, risk which is being built, and they are the into governance. Whether local self-government or people, elected representative, and also the executives of the local government are fairly exposed to such kind of pragmatic solutions which global community who are working on disaster management, working on urban development, working on urban planning, uh, informing our elected representative of the same. So that was the idea behind this, and that's what we program. And one program is not enough, so large number of programs are to be organized, and more engagement of the elected representatives are also needed at the local level. So that was the agenda, sir. And with this, I would just close here on my remark. But the experience of Shri Anil Sinha Sahab, who has been there in this sector for long, I can say that when this disaster management was actually into formulation stage, and that time Ministry of Agriculture was the nodal agency. Coming from there to the high powered committee, and then subsequently leading from the front as the vice chairman of the Bihar State Disaster Management Authority, where he could deal with all level of governance. So his wisdom, his experience, and his continued kind of updating himself on this issue would help us. Thank you very much, sir, for joining and giving us time. Uh, and I welcome you again on behalf of Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal and my personal behalf and entire team of NIDM. Mohanna is coordinating from our side, and we are there, sir. So I welcome you, sir, and all the panelists, Mr. Rohit was also there. He is also here, and All India Local Self-Government Executive are also there. So I take this opportunity to welcome them again in this workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And next, I would welcome Mr. Gagan Sinha as well, who will be giving our introductory remarks, who is the Secretary General of Foundation EMDA South Asia, to present his introductory remarks. Sir, I welcome you and over to you, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and especially to Dr. Anil Sinha. And I would like to also just especially convey, we have very much been on the talk right from the beginning. It's probably some technical glitch, like even for me right now on the video, and hence I'm speaking to you. But I welcome you, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you as a panelist. Just coming to our organization, Foundation EMDA South Asia. We are part of the EMDA network based out of Luxembourg. In India, we have a small operation whereby, of course, the disaster management and capacity building is one of the, in addition to good governance, is one of the prime areas. And we have been working closely in partnership with All India Institute of Local Self-Governance. And of course, we've had close cooperation with also the NIDM, from whom we have got regular guidance how to deal with the daily challenges that come up in the disaster management space, which is happening in all shapes and kind of forms these days. And of course, we would like to now take inputs from experts and to see how we can contribute to the different policies in case there are any gaps that exist, and also to help implement as and where required.
Mr. Sinha, you are not audible right now.
Yeah, probably it's the signal issue, Mohana. Hello, can you get me now? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
I can also hear you, Gagan. You go ahead.
Yeah, yes, sir. So it's probably a little signal issue, but nevertheless.
Hello?
So yeah, okay. So I'm carrying on. Yeah, and
Mr. Sinha, you are not audible right now.
all right.
Mohana, we can hear him all right. So
Yeah.
you check your connection, because Gagan Sinha is audible to us.
Right. So coming back to that, so one of the key ideas that we would like to bring forth, and of course take the feedback of our eminent panelists, is to have more of a concrete platform for where all stakeholders like ourselves who are trying to contribute to the development and the management of different disasters, to come on a similar platform and have a more focused approach for policy to assist the decision makers, as well as implementation agencies, so that the delivery of what we are planning to do to assist the community at large is more effective. This is our main agenda, to so that our focus to address the disaster issues are more manageable. So this is what we would like to suggest here, and from here on I would like to just pass it on to Mohana to then give it on to the more the panelists today, and I welcome everyone here on the
Two things.
Yes, sir.
One, what is the full form of EMDA? If you can kindly educate me on that.
It is for Foundation for Encouraging and Monitoring Development Assistance. So, but we happen to be registered as Foundation EMDA because that is the logo in Luxembourg, sir. Yeah.
That's okay, but still,
yeah. Sure, sir. Sure. Do appreciate that.
Emergency management and
encouraging and monitoring development assistance. So it's just because we have a little wider scope than just the disaster management. It also covers good governance and capacity building in technological levels, and also market linkages in agriculture, sir. So that's where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Gaganji, for the your remarks and explaining about your organization. I understand we are meeting for the first time.
Sure, sir. Sir, but it's a pleasure to be speaking to you, because you are quite a known person in this field, and I welcome you here and thank you so much for sparing time to be here, sir. Thank you.
I was just wondering if we can have you on the video for a couple of seconds so that I know who is the person I am.
Yes, I will do that in a bit here, sir, because I'm also stuck somewhere. So it's just a situation of
Okay.
little.
Okay, I understand.
So just kind of. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Mohana, please go ahead. Mohana, please.
Thank you, sir. And sir, so we'll now move forward for our technical sessions. Since I will give as Gagan Sinha sir said, that you need no introduction, but still I'll again go over your introduction, a short introduction. Sir, Mr. Anil Sinha has more than 30 years of professional career experience. He has extensive experience in the field of public administration, management, policy analysis and programming, national level capacity building efforts for environmental and climate change issues, including DRI. And he has various works of analytical writing on disaster reduction policies, planning and programming issues. Sir, I welcome you for today's session, which is on community engagement. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mohana. And thanks to everyone. Namaste and good morning to everyone. Professor Santosh Kumar, Gagan Sinha ji, Dr. Shankara Kutti Nair ji, Ravi Guru. I can see his name. I thought he was also going to give some, yeah, Gagan ji, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Morning, sir.
Morning. Maybe we'll hear Mr. Ravi Guru later on. I'm really grateful to NIDM, and I feel privileged and honored to be taking part in this event organized by NIDM, along with All India Institute of Local Self-Government. Some time back, maybe around 2 or 3 years back, I'm unable to recall right now, but I think there is some, maybe a couple of years back, I had the occasion to visit the All India Institute AIILSG office in Patel Nagar, somewhere in Delhi. Of course, not in Bombay. I was happy to see their campus, you see. So I'm very happy to be interacting with Abhishek, and I'm looking forward to. I figured I must have met some of your senior guys, etc. Okay. Now, having said this, let me say this is a very, very important topic, I think. What we are going to discuss is literally a crisis, you see. It's a disaster which has already happened. And, it's unfolding before us as far as the urban scenario is concerned. And I don't think we really have the answers, or if we have the answers, we don't have the mechanisms. If we have the mechanisms, we don't have the resources, we don't have the capacities, we don't have the finances and all that. Now, you see, I will not go much into statistics because statistics are very easily available. And I'm sure many other experts will be speaking and quoting statistics. And then many times I believe that unless until statistics, they are properly placed, you see, macro statistics hide many of the micro level, differentiation and the matrix, etc. So many times one doesn't really get the very correct picture, you see. Now, we all know that India has been one of the fastest growing economies for the last 2 decades, you see, in the world. And that has a lot of implications, you see. Urbanization, I'm not going to the rate of that. I think all of us, we know all kinds of figures which are projected by 2030, by 2050. But what we have, the extent of urbanization already is a crisis, you see. And it's a crisis because the planners, the managers, and we all have not been able to, in a way, rise up to this kind of a situation which has arisen before us. But let me take back, as to why this kind of a thing has happened, a little bit reflection on that. I have been in the in the service, and after that, now the public service for almost 50 years. I started serving from 1970, and and I remember that when I used to be in the school, you see, and college, then one thing which we used to hear was कि भारत की आत्मा कहाँ बसती है, तो भारत की आत्मा गांव में बसती है. बात सही थी. I mean, there was nothing inappropriate about it. This was very appropriate and all that. But I think somehow that psyche built, a mindset built, if one may call a bias built, about this, and we got so engrossed, and we are still engrossed into that. I had the occasion to quickly look into some latest research, etc., and where they say that there is still a whole lot of political rural bias inbuilt into our own system, etc., etc. Perhaps that is what has led to the kind of a situation that while we were attending and focusing on the rural areas, after all, 80% of India, not now, but earlier, lived in the rural areas, and they were a very important part. We were the agriculture economy. So all that thing was there. There's absolutely nothing wrong. But I think what happened somewhere, we didn't see the trend, you see. As we were progressing, and especially in the last 2-3 decades, as the economic growth, after the liberalization, etc., etc., we started going faster. And then the kind of scenario which was emerging, I think that is where perhaps we lagged behind, you see. Now, if we look at, some of the developments in way back in 1992, you see, we had the 74th Amendment of the Constitution. We had both 73rd and the 74th. The 74th Amendment of the Constitution uh, defined urban local bodies, as the third tier of government, you see. That was very clearly mandated in the Constitution itself, and it is there. And the state governments were given the responsibility, to transfer a certain set of functions relating to the urban governance, planning, management, etc., to the urban local bodies, you see. The whole idea was that there is a constitutional uh, basis of local self-government in the urban areas as well as local self-government in the rural context, you see. And obviously the state governments were the prime movers, while the central government brought about the constitutional amendment. But the drivers of this change, paradigm change, I would say, was the state governments, you see. And under Schedule 12, 12th Schedule of the Constitution, you see certain things relating to better quality of life and in the urban areas, generating an investment climate to sustain growth, because urban areas, they are becoming, they were becoming, and they are the centers of growth, you see, drivers of growth. So, but somehow that is where we have slipped. And the state governments, most of the state governments somehow or the other, either attitudinal problems or other issues or mindsets or whatever, this devolution of power and the finances and building the capacities of the urban local bodies has not happened the way it was envisaged in 1992, you see. And that is what has led to enormous challenges, if one may say, as far as the urban scenario is concerned. Now, there are the institutional features which we'll talk about, the devolution mechanisms we'll talk about. You see, we know that urbanization is needed for industry and service sector, including, but this also includes rural rejuvenation. When we are talking of urban development, then it is not that as far as the plans thus now are concerned, they do not really leave the rural areas isolated, you see. There is a concept of peri-urban areas also, and after that the rural areas, and the urban growth, urban planning if done properly, in fact, provides a stimulus to the rural rejuvenation also. So we have to look at it in the holistic context, you see. Now, the lack of empowerment of the cities, and that has been a big problem, bridging the urban infrastructure deficit and institutional reforms. They are very, very necessary. And we have had programs of urban renewal, JNNU, and now also we are having several programs, you see. Now, in fact, I would like to be apprised at some stage, and I have interacted with the top faculty and the director of National Institute of Urban Affairs in a couple of meetings some time back, and from the All India Institute of AIILSG as to what exactly are the measures being taken to build these urban bodies, you see. Now, let me come to, since we are talking of the disaster context also, so let me come to a couple of things, you see. Just 1 minute, please. The Disaster Management Act, for the first time, a legislation on Disaster Management Act was passed by Parliament in 2005, you see. And I'll just mention 2-3 things, you see, about it. One is the definition of disaster, you see. So for the first time in 2005 in the country, we have a definition of this word disaster. Before that, disaster may have been used, but the definition, it was never defined, never ever defined anywhere, neither in the constitution nor in any one of the list, central list, state list, and the concurrent list, etc., which defines the functions of the central and the state government and the concurrent areas of jurisdiction, you see. Now, what is important about the definition of disaster? 2 things. One is that it's a very challenging challenging definition. And the second is that it has direct link with the urban scenario. Now, why is it challenging? Because the definition talks, and I've got the Disaster Management Act, before me. I'm not reading from that, but basically it talks of a mishap, a catastrophe, or a grave occurrence which happened due to natural causes, due to man-made disasters, due to accident, due to negligence. So if we really look at the spread of this, natural causes, man-made reasons, you see, and then accident, and then negligence, then they are so generic that perhaps nothing is left, you see. And there are people who believe, and I think that I'm also one of those, that there is nothing like really a natural disaster. Whatever disasters are there, they are man-made, you see. Because disasters are basically hazards, you see. And when those hazards intersect with the developmental paradigm, the human beings, the population, etc., etc., and if that interaction is not really good, then disasters, the hazards convert into disasters. You look at the case of, in our country now, unfortunately, perhaps there is no state where the state capital has not faced an urban flood, you see. Starting from, Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir, down to Chennai, and in between Mumbai, and perhaps almost every year, you talk of Delhi, you talk of Patna floods, you see, last couple of years, way back in 1975 also, etc. Now they are, what we hear, that suddenly a precipitation, 100-year precipitation, this and that, etc., has happened, and that is why this kind of a thing has happened. But my dear friends, especially for those who work on urban planning, I would like to say that there is nothing, you see, nothing unusual about these precipitations, you see. Those kinds of, if we pick up the records, I think those kinds of precipitations happened 100 years earlier also. That is what the news and the IMD will tell you. But then it did not cause a disaster. Now it is causing a disaster because the developmental paradigm and the model which we have followed in practically all these running across, crisscrossing the whole country, has been very, very, it has several fault lines all around. I'm not getting into details of that, but perhaps everywhere it is the urban planning or the lack of urban planning, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of drainage and the sanitation, all those things you see. And then the unregulated kind of construction and development which has taken place in practically all of these. In Chennai, I remember I had read when the Chennai floods took place a couple of years back, that they used to have 360 odd water bodies. And when the floods took place, then the statistics came out that they had just about 100 plus. That was reduced to just about 100 plus. So what has happened? They have not gone up in the sky. They have obviously disappeared because of the kind of development, urbanization, building, construction, and other things which have taken place, you see. I mean, so that is why it is very important to connect the definition of disaster where we are talking of man-made disasters. Natural is, I think, being mentioned because of historical reasons. That has been the understanding. But natural hazards are there, as I said. All disasters are man-made. We literally, as a country, have created all the disasters of urban flooding, talking of only one disaster which has taken place recently all across India. Then the definition of disaster, one more thing is important. The very next line of the definition also talks of all those activities which are adverse to environment. So we've already talked of natural, man-made, accident, negligence, and then adverse to environment. So nothing really is left under the sky. And since you have accidents, since you have negligence, man-made disasters, during the pandemic in the last 1 year, you see, we have had several man-made disasters. But several. What to talk of accidents? Unfortunately, people don't consider road accident to be a disaster, you see. But I would say that the definition is very clear. The definition doesn't say any type of accident, you see. Especially road accident, which kills maximum number of people in a year. You take these statistics and combine all disasters together, whether it is earthquake or it is cyclones or it is floods happening, regularly in many states, or any other landslides happening in some states, etc., or anything else, or fire. You see, all those total do not still equal to the number of people who are dying in road accidents. You see. And talking of urban planning, I think that is very, very important. That we take cognizance of that. Every minute there is a accident on our roads, and every fourth accident is fatal. You see, and 1.5 lakh people, 150,000 people are losing their lives. This is those who are losing their life. I'm not talking of those who become disabled, who become, unfortunately, who are rendered, disabled, etc., etc., and their economic earning power, everything is affected, I think. So I think it has tremendous ramifications. Of course, rail accidents, air accidents, they are all covered in this. During the pandemic, we have had chemical and industrial disasters. Fires. I mean, only the celebrated SII, Serum Institute of India, and 5 people lose their lives just day before yesterday. You see. And children lost lives recently in hospitals. So fires are also something which is very important, and fire is basically one of the major urban functions. You see. And that is why I'm emphasizing on this. If one starts talking of the list of fires, I mean, starting from Upahar in Delhi to in Chennai, schools and Haryana, Dabwali, this and that, the list is endless. And yet we do not have the kind of strict, implementation and enforcement of fire regulations, you see. We have fire acts, you see. One of the oldest is in Mumbai. And practically, I suppose every state has a fire act. And yet somehow this subject is not taken seriously. And we still do not have, I think there's a lot of, that is why I said, you take macro figures, then there's a different picture. But if you take micro figures, then a different picture emerges, that even now there's a lot of deficit as far as the fire capacities and the capabilities are concerned, I do not know whether Mumbai meets the standards and the norms of having fire stations and firemen and training capacities, etc., as per the global standards or whatever the standard we may be having. It's not that now we have any less standards than global standards, you see. Now, this was one thing about the definition. The second thing about the definition which I want to talk is the institutional structure which has been provided in the Disaster Management Act. We have three-tier institutional structure, you see. At the national level, we have a National Disaster Management Authority headed by none other than Honorable Prime Minister. And in the state level, every state is mandated, obliged by law to have a state disaster management authority and headed by the respective chief ministers. And then at the district level, we have district disaster management authority headed by the district magistrates and co-chaired by the Jilla Parishad, you see. But unfortunately, you see, we have not conceived of a disaster management authorities even for metropolitan bodies, you see. Like, I don't think cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, or any such metropolitan city, or even Lucknow or Patna, the district disaster management authority would make a district disaster management plan. Now we talk of multi-hazard district disaster management plan. But can the district disaster management authority, where Mumbai is situated, make a plan for the district which will encompass a plan for the Mumbai Municipal Corporation? No, not at all, you see. So I have a suggestion to my colleagues in both the Institute of AIILSG and also to NIDM, that I think a time has come. I think time came much earlier, we did not recognize. Maybe in 2005 itself, we should have recognized that having just DDMAs in all the district will not suffice. Many people will say that, sir, there is a provision in the Disaster Management Act, and yes, the provision is right here, section 41. There is section 41. There is chapter 6, which has only one section, that is section 41. And this talks of the functions of the local authority. I'm not going to the details of it, which is basically the municipal bodies, you see. But the case is that it does talk of what should be done, etc., etc. But municipal body, even of Patna, what to talk of Mumbai, you see, whose budget is as big as the budget of the rest of the state government, even of Patna or Lucknow or Bhopal, I don't think the district disaster management authorities can do justice to the disaster management scenario, and the planning and the management and implementation of the cities, you see. So I think there is time. I hope someone will carry this, my plea and voice, DMA, Mr. Kamal Kishorji, member. He was chairing a committee for the revision of the Act. I had participated in some discussion, but I must express my apologies. At that time, I had given several suggestions, you see, but I didn't mention this. But today, when I was thinking, and last night I was working on this, then it appeared to me that no, I think it is being unfair to the municipal demands. The municipal, the configuration which we have, and therefore the Act must provide, at least in a graded manner, that the metropolitans and the bigger municipalities, you can have a criteria of a certain population. I mean, that is what is being done from metropolitan down to the notified area committees, that you see there should be a separate, independent, inbuilt within their bodies, urban local bodies, a municipal district disaster management municipal disaster management authority. And they, with adequate powers, adequate functions, adequate devolutions, etc. They will also have to have a state-of-the-art, emergency operations center, with database which is updated. I mean, even Delhi, for that matter, if a serious disaster was to happen today in Delhi, the capital of the country, and by serious I mean where, say 10 to 20,000 casualties are there, and several thousand injuries are there, And we must talk of these kinds of worst case scenarios. This is perhaps not the worst case, but one of the worst kind of a possibilities, Is Delhi prepared to handle 10,000 casualties and say 50,000, injuries, There have been tremors. Last year, there were maybe 15, 20 tremors in Delhi. We have been lucky. I live in the NCR, not in Delhi. So we have also felt. But if ever there was a strong tremor in Delhi, God forbid, 7 and above and all that, I tell you the kind of scenario, the figures which I am projecting would be much less than what would really emerge. The question is Delhi prepared? I recall a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi several years back, And then he said he shudders to think, the Lieutenant Governor's words were that he shudders to think of this kind of a scenario. Because the kind of system which we need to have, the kind of database which we need to have, the kind of state-of-the-art emergency operations which we need to have, the kind of public awareness, education, etc., we must precede, I think nothing exists. So therefore, I'm mentioning that this kind of a thing is required in the District Disaster Management Act, that should be there. Then I'm not repeating these, that, as we grow fast, there are rising aspirations and growing middle class is there, socially, financially, environmentally, the whole model of urban development is becoming rather unsustainable, and the challenge is to radically improve the quality of life, accommodate future growth, along with synergetic development of rural sector and cities to be the engines of growth, Now, another basic question which I want to raise, now I'm over with my points as far as the Disaster Management Act is concerned, that I think these urban local bodies, the municipalities, they were conceived and set up, if I am not wrong, in the late 18th century, 1780 or 89, something like that. Some time back, I had seen, I think the Bangalore Municipal Corporation, one of the oldest, was set up then, And one question which keeps on coming to my mind is, are the municipalities as on today up to the current challenges and really up to the emerging challenges? I don't think. I wonder whether serious studies have been taken to evaluate the very architecture of the municipal bodies, the structure of the municipal bodies. I think there is a need to study and assess the architecture, the structure, the how they are, the municipal bodies are structured, what are the divisions, what are the departments, because they were originally created for a certain purpose of revenue collections. But now, maybe drainage and sanitation, etc., would have been there. They were the basic functions of the municipality. But then now the kind of challenges which have come already, the kind of obligations which we have under global frameworks like Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, which very clear-cut, definable, quantifiable targets, they have 4 priorities, they have 7 targets, they have monitoring mechanisms, Then we have sustainable development goals, which are linked intimately to the urban planning, urban scenario. Then we have the Paris Agreement, where certain commitments have been made. India has been at the forefront of that. Are the municipal bodies really up to it, When I go to a meeting which is on children, focusing on child health, education, nutrition, or I go to another meeting where gender is being discussed. And then in the urban scenarios, we talk of slums, we talk of all such areas, we talk of children who are deprived of education. We talk of Professor Santosh Kumar mentioned about the dropout rates just a couple of days back, and how do we deal with that? Now, in that kind of a situation, we talk of gender sensitive, we talk of child sensitive, child focused kind of functions of the municipal bodies. But I wonder whether municipal bodies are really created to deal with these kinds of functions. Or we believe that create a cell. Now a new issue has come, so create a cell and that will be enough. Appoint one, consultant, and we feel that is enough. My thinking is entirely different, and I would really like to be educated. But my serious proposition is that the structure and the architecture, along with the powers and functions, I wish that the 1992 74th Amendment had also undertaken or pushed for the assessment evaluation of the municipal bodies in terms of their architecture, structure, and all those things. You see, I do not know whether it happened. I have not really worked much in that sector, so kindly pardon me. But that is my proposition. You see. Now we talked of so that is one thing. Of course, we have now several schemes. Smart cities are there, and let me just say, talking of smart cities will have to be safe cities, first of all. There are many things which we are talking. We're talking of IT enabled kind of an environment, so traffic, integrated management, and drainage and sanitation, all those solid waste management, etc., in these smart cities. But as a disaster practitioner and believer in the fact that hazards can be prevented from converting into a disaster, and therefore we can have a disaster-free kind of a country, a disaster-free society. So I'm citing one example. See, I worked in Kobe in Japan. Now, Kobe suffered a serious earthquake, 7.3, on 17th of January 1995. And I think I joined my assignment around 10 years later, you see. But I had been going to Kobe even after the earthquake. The scenario after the Kobe earthquake, all decimation, etc., that one could see. And the scenario by the time I went to join my assignment, you could not recognize that it is the same Kobe which has faced a serious earthquake where more than 6,000 people died. And I tell you, talking of the nature of disasters, just to make, because this is something to be kept in view by the urban planners, is more people died because of a secondary disaster than earthquake. Out of 6,400 people, 2,000 odd died from the earthquake. But more than 4,000 people died because of fires, you see. They have houses of light material, other infrastructure like that. And when these electrical wires, live electrical wires, etc., fell down, that led to a lot of fires. And these are their statistics. We can't doubt them. More people died because of the fire issue. So therefore, these kinds of complex scenarios will have to be kept in view in the urban planning. But the kind of resilience which they showed, you see, that is the kind of a thing. What remains today in Kobe is a museum. You go around Kobe, if someone has not told you, you would never even imagine that there is such a serious earthquake, you see. And the only evidence of that is a museum, wonderful, beautiful museum which they have created, which was just next to my office in the next building, where whatever they have wanted, they felt relevant, has been kept there along with children's section and all those things, you see. It's an instrument of learning, institution of learning lessons, you see. That is the kind of a resilience, which we should be moving towards. But let me also say that it's not that we have not done that. Let me talk of Bhuj, you see. After Bhuj earthquake in 2001, I used to be Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture. On the same day, 26 January, in the morning it happened, in the night, less than 12, I was sitting with the collector in Bhuj, you see. That story I am leaving apart, you see. How that all happened, crisis management group under cabinet secretary meeting at 3 o'clock, you see, etc. But Bhuj has also, the government of Gujarat and Bhuj especially has set examples. 4 cities, Gandhidham, Anjar, Bachao, and I think Bhuj itself, which were totally destroyed. The district hospital had sat down, killing 179 people, if I remember correct, which were patients and doctors and paramedics. Around 1,200 children had died because school buildings fell on them. 26 January, children were there to celebrate Republic Day, that kind of thing. But the redeeming feature was, which I want to mention, is that we can do it. Is that all those 4 cities, if one visits now, I have not visited recently, I must have visited maybe around 10 years back or around that, they are the stories of resilience. They are the stories of rejuvenation, you see. They are the stories where the old cities were totally cleaned out and new cities, according to the latest norms of urban planning, urban management, addressing all kinds of urban issues, they were set up, you see. I think that was a great example. So along with Kobe on one hand, I'd also like to quote, Bhuj and the rejuvenation of the setting up of these 4 cities. You see, now what has happened, I do not know, but that was a great process and we can talk about it, later on, you see. Now, I think the 12th schedule, if I may go back briefly, talks of urban planning, town planning, land use regulation, which is what I mentioned in the beginning. All these cities across India, land use regulation, unfortunately, has not been addressed. Then construction of buildings, roads, bridges, water, public health, sanitation, solid waste management, and all those kinds of things, you see. Now, one more thing which I would like to mention, which is very, very important, talking of these, because 12th schedule talks of not only land use regulation, but also construction of buildings and roads, bridges, and all that. How do you build a resilient infrastructure? I'm happy that Government of India has now taken an initiative, you see, after these cyclones, Odisha, etc. Again, they are great stories of our country, where from 99 super cyclone, when 10,000 people, as per official estimates and unofficially maybe 30,000 people lost their lives. You see, a lot of villages were wiped out of the map of the state, you see. And then in 2013, when Filin happens and Hudud happens later on and all that, Odisha state and Government of India has been able to reduce the loss of lives to just about 2 digits, you see. That is a great story, you see. And every disaster leaves its own signatures. Every disaster, even if of the same category. 2 earthquakes happening in, say, one in Bihar or Northeast and one in Kashmir would leave their own signatures, which must be taken note of, and the lessons must be learned, etc. Lessons must be then, practiced elsewhere, and all that, you see, that must be done. So one good practice, I mentioned a couple of good practices of Japan to Gujarat. Let me mention one good practice of Bihar also, where I worked, you see. You see, all of us, we know, talking of construction, etc., that there is a national building code at the national level, you see. 1960s, way back, our colleague, late Professor Arya, he was one of the pioneers of that, you see. We have been having national building codes, which have been revised from time to time, you see. But till now, the national building codes are only advisory in nature, you see. national building codes, unfortunately, do not have a backing of law. So they cannot be enforced by law, you see. But Bihar, we did this miracle. You see. Every state has a building bylaws, you see, local building bylaws. So what Professor Arya did, and I'm mentioning this as a tribute to his imagination, you see, that when the building bylaws were being revised, and building bylaws are laws, they are no less than the laws. They are called bylaws, but they're as sacred and as enforceable as any law. So they are adopted. They go to the assembly. It is adopted formally in the assembly, and then only a building bylaw becomes a building bylaw. It's practically an act, you see. So in the building bylaws, where we talk of constructions, etc., then the whole chapter of resilient construction or disaster safe construction, with all those safety, earthquake safety audit, norms, parameters, etc., which are given in the National Building Code, which is advisory, was included as an annexure in the building bylaws of Bihar, I think adopted by the State Assembly in 2014. So the miracle has been, and I would wish that institutions like AIILSG, NIUA, and other champions of urban planning kindly note this, that National Building Code, which is advisory at the national level, has become mandatory in the government of Bihar, you see, because they have been included, those provisions, not the whole National Building Code, but provisions relating to safe and resilient construction, they have been included, as annexure to relevant parts of the building laws, building bylaws. So it has become mandatory. I think this kind of innovation can be done, improvisation, innovation, whatever you call, but very creative tweaking of the system can be done all over India, because otherwise the local building bylaws are not really enforceable, and they are not really as strong and in terms of enforcing seismic safety and other safety, etc., etc. So I thought I'll mention this. This is something very, very important. Now the 74th Amendment again, laid down that at the national level we have finance commission. We just had 15 finance commission. I think it is still there. I suppose now its report will be tabled in the parliament in the budget session, and we will know the full recommendations. But the recommendations on disaster management, they came earlier, but I think the fuller version will came. But while the finance commissions, which flow from Article 280 of the Constitution, they have tremendous force and tremendous constitutional backing, have been able to do a great job. We have the 15th, but 74th Amendment had also envisaged that every state would set up state finance commissions, basically to address this. But somehow or the other, I think that scenario has not really come up to the expectations. So that is also one of the issues which we'll have to really need to address, because unless until state governments, first of all, develop the willpower, they have the faith in the third tier of government, that is at the urban local bodies, complete faith, and also Panchayati Raj institutions, you see, we'll have to have faith in them. I mean, those institutions after 70 years, they have to grow. And this is our constitutional obligation. So I think that should be there. So now, if we look at the urban, I didn't really elaborate on that, but I think urban disaster scenario, if I may just say, has become far worse than the rural disaster scenarios. I think the urban situations have become very, very complex. I'm not going to the details of that. All kinds of ways, all kinds of construction, all unregulated, and therefore a whole host of unprecedented problems relating to development, sanitation, mobility has become such a huge problem, e-governance, service delivery, etc., etc. I think all these things have become have come in unprecedented kind of dimensions. So I think that is very, very important. And I suppose all these things can be addressed better if the municipal governance is strengthened, if the municipal governance also have their own inbuilt focus on disaster management. I think that will be good. Now, coming to the community engagement, which was one part of the topic, you see, and I think now I'm coming to the end of my time. It was up to 11:45. Maybe we started a bit late, but I have just one point left, you see. One example from Bihar, which I like to cite, is that Government of India, NDMA, started a school safety program, National School Safety Program, NSSP, but it was confined to only 22 states and only 2 districts in each state and only 200 schools in each district. But we upscaled this program. We said that we cannot differentiate, and there is no logical basis on which we can select 2 districts out of 38 and 200 schools out of on an average 2000 schools in a district, you see. हम बाकी बच्चों को कैसे छोड़ सकते हैं? There is just no criteria whatsoever. We worked on it, but there was no criteria which will satisfy your mind also and your conscience also, you see. So then we said, no, we got to bite the bullet, you see. And then we proposed, we made a scheme over 2-3 months' time, huge consultations, discussions, brainstorming. But we said, no, the school safety program has to be taken up universally with 2 principles. We must invest in a generation. We are used to 5-year planning. Of course, it has paid its own dividends. And now, of course, we have a little different model in the country. But we are used to 5-year planning. But in terms of school safety, you see, and in terms of catching children young, in terms of making citizens who will be disaster aware, who will be disaster resilient, and who will be the ambassadors of disaster resilience, I think we got to have universal coverage. So to every urban local body in the country, I would like to make an appeal that all the schools, your areas are defined, you see. Your areas are defined. You have a limited area compared to the whole district. You know the number of schools. So introduce disaster management in each and every school, you see. And introduce means learning by doing, you see. We create volunteers, we create cadres, we imbibe the whole culture of prevention, we imbibe the whole culture of volunteerism, the way it exists in many advanced countries, whether it is Japan or US, Australia, whatever you see, where people like you and me, are the volunteers in disaster times. In India, when we think of volunteers, तो हमारे दिमाग में कौन आता है? चौकीदार आते हैं, होम गार्ड आते हैं, सिविल डिफेंस के लोग आते हैं. That is very unfair, and that's a very, very short-sighted view of the concept of volunteerism, you see. I think you and I, in our own positions, with our own skills, our own domain of functioning, you see, can be very good volunteers in serious disaster situations, you see. So I think all the schools must be covered, all hospital safety is something which is very, very crucial, talking of the urban planning. And then RWAs, you see, I do not know, Abhishek ji, or someone can give me, city-wise number of RWAs. I'm interested in them because we keep on talking of making disaster everyone's business. तो कम से कम urban area में हम हर एक RW में पहुंच पाएं, तो that will be great, you see. Then slums, and then all of the stakeholder groups like women's and children, etc. Social media is there, very potent, very powerful. We know the power of that. Now we are seeing that, you see, I think. So for public awareness and education, through newsletters, social media, all these, whatever is possible but must be done, because a city cannot be smart unless until it is safe. A city cannot be smart if children are not safe walking on the city. Cannot be smart if the girls and women are not safe in the city, you see. You can have very good transport system, you can have metros, but the city must also be safe for the children and women and those with special abilities, the young, unless until those things are really built, I don't think cities can be smart or safe, you see. So, well, friends, I think with these, I'd like to stop. I hope I have been able to share some of my thoughts, some of my concerns, and some of my suggestions with all of you. Thank you very much once again for giving me this wonderful opportunity, and thanks a lot for patient hearing. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. And we are really grateful that you have so nicely shared your experience, your rich experience, as well as you have flagged such important issues and has encouraged us to move towards a more of holistic and inclusive kind of disaster risk reduction. And you have very correctly pointed out that the urban development or the urban risks are not only a standalone issue, but a integrated approach needs to be taken care of, where we have to take in also care of the rural development, and as well as you have talking about disability inclusiveness, women inclusiveness. So all these suggestions and recommendations are very valued, and we will try, as all of our organizations who are involved in this webinar, will try to make this into action for future. And now I will welcome Sri Ravi Ranjan Guru, Deputy Director General of All India Local Self-Governance, to give say a few words about this webinar and address the participants of this webinar. Over to you, sir.
Namaste. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for giving me opportunity to speak here. And yeah, I was hearing Anilji very well, and I think he's mentioned very important points, and that's a very important aspects to look into the holistic view. Sir, AIILSG, my colleague already has given the little bit background about the All India Institute of Local Self-Government. It's a very old organization, almost 5 years now we are completing. We have a presence across India, working on a various aspect of local government. And I must say that after the 73 and 74th amendment, there are a lot of things been talked about for the urban local bodies, and AIILSG is a pioneer on those line and supporting the urban local bodies to work on the way aspect of 73rd and 74th amendment. AIILSG has a various verticals across all the sectors, and one of the verticals is disaster management as well. We have a National Fire Academy based in Baroda, and we, under the National Fire Academy, sir, we have a disaster risk reduction cell based out Mumbai, Pune, and Baroda. We are working on almost all the Government of India's programs and activities. Even recently, we have prepared the Pune Municipal Corporation Disaster Risk Reduction Plan. And what, sir, you are talking about, that's very important, sir, because ultimately, wherever it is a disaster comes, it's urban local body who comes first. Immediately, whether your NDRF is there or maybe any other task force are there, but ultimately it's the local government who has to respond immediately, because ultimately cities are and citizens are the first who are going to affect of this disaster. So we have done this kind of works, and in fact I'm very proud to say that Pune has municipal corporation has accepted our disaster reduction plans prepared by All India Institute of Local Self-Government, and there are many urban local bodies whose disaster risk reduction plans been prepared by AIILSG. We are also working and supporting, going to support J&K state for almost all the urban local bodies disaster reduction plan. And they have requested us to prepare the plan for that. We have submitted the information and the data required to prepare those lines. Odisha government also, we are in touch with them. And this one another program that you mentioned about the national safety program, national school safety programs. And we are very proud to say that in Maharashtra, we have done that. Most of the training programs has been organized at school level by All India Institute of Local Self-Government. And our team based at Pune and Mumbai, they have done this. And in fact, we had a little bit discussion with the National Institute of Disaster Management, NIDM, to roll out this school safety programs to the other state as well. And because of the presence of AIILSG across India, almost all our center is in Srinagar. We have a center in Srinagar also. We have a center in Trivandrum also. We have a center in Port Blair also. So that kind of a presence we have. Our team are based across India. So the rollout is a very easy for us, and we are the one who is actually giving those kind of a support to the urban local bodies. Another component where we are actually working and supporting the government of India is capacity building programs. So we have the very well-designed module for the capacity building programs. In fact, not only India, sir, we are also working with the South Asia, and recently the almost 50 government official from Dhaka Municipal Corporation, they have visited us before the corona, and we have given the training programs on the DRR and also the practical training programs to those government officials. We have the residential facilities in almost all these centers, and one training we have conducted in Delhi and another was in Chennai. Along with, obviously, I remember that the NIDM professor were there, and they have supported us this training programs. The similar training programs we are organizing for the urban local bodies of India as well, and supporting the various urban local bodies here in India. Another good project that we have recently started, sir, with the support of European Union, that's called CRIC, Climate Resilience Inclusive Cities. You mentioned about such resilience, and that's the most important, because ultimately, because of the development and the changes, we need to develop certain kind of resilience to deal those challenges. And I think there we are started this 5-year project. And we have the triangular cooperation kind of project. So we have the certain kind of cities and the support from the European countries. We have the certain cities, almost 10 to 15 cities from Indonesia. And there are certain cities we have taken from India. And we are talking about the triangular cooperation. We are taking the certain kind of a technology support from the European countries, knowledge, as well as developing the cities inclusive plan. We are saying the climate resilience inclusive cities plan, where we are going to develop the plan. And those plans, we are going to, these plans will be look into the model plans, maybe initially model plans. And our idea is to roll out to the various urban local bodies in India as well as in Indonesia and some of the European countries as well. And there are a lot of capacity building programs. So we are talking about the complete packaging of the these activities. And thanks to the European Union, they are supporting this initiative. And hopefully we'll be giving very good results under this program, sir. Another component where I think we are also helping NIDM, and I remember this initially we have started the certain kind of training programs with the help of NIDM, and I remember one of the training programs I have also attended where we have done it. Another initiative that we are doing with the UNISDR and the UCLG aspect. UCLG aspect is a United States for Local Government. This is an association of local government across the world, sir. So local government become the members of UCLG aspect, and we are leading their activities in India, and I'm heading that also UCLG aspect India office. There we started a certain kind of support and work with the UNISDR in line with the Sendai framework. So there we have also doing the certain kind of planning and the supporting the urban local bodies. So overall, we are trying our level best and supporting the urban local bodies across India. And my team has a lot of experienced people, and they are supporting all the way on those lines. And these webinar series which we have started, I think this is also the whole idea, is that let us have a more awareness activities and engage all the stakeholders at one platform. And thanks to NIDM and EMDA Southasia for supporting these initiatives. And we are now, I think this is a third in a row, and we hope that we will continue this entire web series. And once this corona may be over, then maybe we can have a physical program as well, like we do under the Urban Dialogue series, which my colleague Abhishek take care. So we have this Urban Dialogue series across India, and we go to the various cities, smallest cities, and do the certain kind of activities and discuss the challenges and issues at the local level with all the stakeholders. So I think I am really thanks for to NIDM and the EMDA Southasia and all the panelists and Mr. Anil Kumar ji and all the panelists for joining this initiatives. And I'll be here if anybody wants to ask any question. I would be very happy to answer. And once again, thanks. Over to you. Thank you.
Incidentally, are you based in Delhi or Bombay?
I'm based in Delhi, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
But your head office is in Bombay.
Yes, sir. Head office is in Bombay. I supposed to sit there, sir, but my family is in Delhi, so I kept my base in Delhi, but I keep going to Mumbai, sir. Thank you, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Well, we surely look forward to face-to-face programs as well. With that, I would welcome for our next speaker, Dr. A. Sankaramnakuti Nair, for our next session, which is on accessing technological tools and resources for disaster management. So, with giving a brief intro about Dr. A.S. Nair, that he needs no introduction, but giving a brief intro. He is a senior emeritus scientist and presently the program director of Center for Environment and Development. He has immense contribution to research in the field of DRR, watershed management, flooding, and other water-related issues, as well as to several other environmental aspects like environmental impact assessment and other aspects. With that, I would welcome him to present his session on accessing technological tools and resources for disaster management. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mohina. Can I have my slides, please? My presentation.
Sure, sir. Just 1 second.
Yeah. The first slide, please. Go back. Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much to the organizers for giving me an opportunity to talk on this very special topic, which comes under the building municipalities and citizen awareness for resilient India, under which the second series of lectures where I have been given the task of talking on assessing technological tools and resources for disaster management. Next slide, please. Yes, actually, Sri Anil Sinha has elaborately talked about the Disaster Management Act and related things. However, there are a couple of points which I also want to specifically mention under this talk. This is basically that India is vulnerable in varying degrees to a large number of natural and as well as man-made disasters. 58.6% of the is moderate to very high intensity. My presentation disappeared. Hello.
Yes, sir.
My presentation. Okay. Over. Oh no. Over 40 million hectares, that is 12% of the land, is prone to floods and river erosion. Out of 7,516 kilometer long coastline, closer to 5,700 kilometers is prone to coastal erosion, cyclones, tsunamis. 68% of the cultivable land is vulnerable to drought. Hilly areas in the western and eastern Ghats and large portions of lower and upper Shivalik regions of the entire Himalayas are at risk from landslides and avalanche, and vulnerability to different type of nuclear, biological, chemical disasters. Now, Anil Sinha was basically talking about the land use related things, which is not properly done in our country. Somehow or other, the nation is yet to come out with a land use policy. If such a policy can emerge, some of these issues which have been stressed in this can have a minimal remedial measures. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. Disaster risk in India. Disaster risk in India are further compounded by increasing vulnerability, including for ever-growing population, vast disparities in income, rapid urbanization. Yes, this is rapid urbanization in the sense that many of our villages are slowly getting urbanized. Essentially, Shri Sinha was mentioning about this. Increasing industrialization, development within high-risk zones, environmental degradation, different types of natural and man-made disasters. All these points future where disasters seriously threaten India's population, national security, economy, and our effort to meet the sustainable development goals targeted in 2030. Next slide, please. What is a disaster? This has been talked in detail again by Sinha, but I briefly tell about it. Disaster means a catastrophe, mishap, calamity, or grave occurrence in any area arising from natural or man-made causes or by accident or negligence, which results in substantial loss of life or human sufferings or damage to destruction of property or damage to or degradation of environment, and is of such a nature or magnitude as to be beyond the coping capacity of the community of the affected area. See, that is the most important thing. The disaster which makes the whole lot of things results what comes beyond the coping capacity of the community of the affected area. That makes the disaster all the more serious and important. Next slide, please. Yes. Levels of disaster. Yes, please. Yes, please. The levels of disaster.
Please continue.
Please continue.
Okay, thank you. The levels of disasters need to be categorized and disseminated as L0, L1, L2, and L3 based on the ability of various authorities to deal with them. That is the most important part which is given in the Act. What is that? L0 denotes normal times which are expected to be utilized for close monitoring, documentation, prevention, mitigation, and preparatory activities. This is a planning stage where plans at all levels from community to the state shall be put in place. Training on search and rescue, rehearsals, evaluation, and inventory updating for response activities will be carried out during this time. The next slide, please. There is continuous disturbance. I don't know, somebody is actually talking. I don't know why is it so. Now, L1 specifies disasters that can be managed at the district level. However, the state and center will remain in readiness to provide assistance needed. That is, this particular L1 is the important aspect where we have to look in detail, because the cities, the municipalities, the corporations, etc., are coming under the district, under the district territory actually. Now, L2 specifies disaster situations that may require assistance and active participation of the state and the mobilization of resources at the state level. L3 says disaster situations arise from large-scale disasters where districts and the state may not have the capacity to respond adequately and require assistance from the central government for reinstating the state and district machinery. Even though there cannot be watertight compartmentalization of responsibilities between states and the center, especially in the state of man-made disasters, the participation by center will normally be at L3 level. Can I have the next slide, please? Now we talk on the Disaster Management Act 2005, Act number 53 of 2005. On 23rd December 2005, the Government of India enacted the Disaster Management Act, which envisaged the creation of National Disaster Management Authority, headed by the Prime Minister, and state disaster management authorities, headed by the respective chief ministers, to spearhead and implement the holistic and related programs. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Now, what is disaster management? Now, disaster management means a continuous and integrated process of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures which are necessary or expedient for prevention of danger or threat of any disaster, mitigation or reduction of risk of any disaster or its severity to consequences, capacity building, preparedness to deal with any disaster, prompt response to any threatening disaster situation or disaster, assessing the severity or magnitude of effects of any disaster, evacuation, rescue and relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction. Next, please. Now, managing disasters, that is which we have seen in the Disaster Management Act. Based on the National Disaster Management Act 2005, National Disaster Management Authority, Prime Minister as a chairperson, State Disaster Management Authority Chief Minister as chairman, chairperson, District Disaster Management Authority chairman, chairperson is the collector or district magistrate or deputy commissioner. The most important thing is that the elected representative of the area in the member of the DDMA as the coordinator of the district. Now, this is basically meant to look after the city development plans, thereby getting the city disaster management plan inbuilt. The next one. The next slide, please. Disaster management plans. We have national, we have state, we have district. Now, the district plan shall be prepared by the district authority after consultation with the local authorities and having regard to the national plan and state plan to be approved by the state authority. Here, when I say the local authorities, it is basically the local self-governments which are coming under this particular district authority. In the sense that we have the Grama Panchayat, Block Panchayat, Jilla Parishad, and then the district authority. Along with that, we have municipalities and corporations. So when a plan, when a usual plan emerges out, that should contain the representations as well as the problems envisaged in the whole space. Why? Because even though we say that a district plan the space is available only for the Grama Panchayats, municipalities, or corporations. The other department, that is the revenue sectors, doesn't have any space. So whatever we have to do is basically on the space available. So the space availability is there only for Grama Panchayats and municipalities or corporations. That is the reason why the importance of spatial planning is important. But unfortunately, very little attention is being given in disaster management plan preparation for utilizing spatial planning. Next slide, please. Yes, that is the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act 1992. This act is also known as the Nagara Palika Act, relating to the municipalities, that is the urban local government, was passed by the Parliament on 1st June 1992. The act seeks to provide a common framework for the structure and mandate of urban local bodies to enable them to function as effective democratic units of local self-government. See, we have two constitutional amendments in 92. That is, one is 73rd Amendment and another is 74th. The 74th is exclusively on Nagara Palikas. They are functional and financial autonomy. That is the most important thing. These Nagara Palika Act basically tells that these municipalities and corporations have functional and financial autonomy, in the sense that they have every freedom for resource mobilization, both from the state as well as the central, as well as the major mission programs which are planned, like smart cities or your housing program, housing for all, etc., etc. Now, 25 years after passing the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act 1992, aimed at strengthening democracy at grassroots level through local bodies, only 11 states have managed to devolve municipal functions to urban local bodies. That is the most sad part of the game. Now, this needs to be looked into by the appropriate agency. And it should be rectified at the earliest. Central schemes such as Amrut, Smart City, Housing for All are incentives based and open up huge opportunities for these urban local bodies. Next slide, please. Now, the urban dilemma. What is the urban dilemma? The world over, the frequency of disasters in urban areas are increasing, where the majority of population survive for various reasons. Various reasons known to all of us, because these urban areas are the areas where people can get jobs. See, so people from villages migrate in large number. So many establishments are there. So educated people used to come for their jobs at different levels. So anyway, because of all these, the urban areas are increasing from time to time. In this context, Anilji specifically talked about Bombay. My opinion is that actually it is not only Bombay, it is Bangalore, Chennai, to some extent Calcutta, Hyderabad. So all these places, all these urban areas are increasing out of their space which is available in these particular cities. So cities in the developing world have high vulnerability and low resilience. This is true. All over the world it is true. How it is true? History reveals that numerous cities were damaged by natural and human-induced disasters, with the thousands of inhabitants are either buried under debris or washed away by gushing water. Kerala in 2018. We have seen a similar example. It has not gone into the history. It's just 2 years back. Now, whenever a disaster hits an urban area, it creates widespread damage, and claimed that disaster risk of a city comes from the failure of its urban government. Yes, it is true. Why? Because it is the urban government responsibility is to see that how that state's ecosystem is properly maintained. Okay, so if the ecosystem fails, at least in few areas, then the failure on disasters will be of large scale. Now, the level of economic development, risk reduction, disaster preparedness, and resilience of a city primarily depend on the role and efficiency of the city government. So, city government cannot have any excuse. It is true that in India also, many of our urban areas are overcrowded and facing natural and human-induced disasters where large number of losses are being faced. Next slide, please. Now, let us see the objectives of the policy formulation. Promoting a culture of prevention and preparedness by center staging disaster management as an overriding priority at all levels and at all times. Encouraging mitigation measures based on state-of-the-art technology and environmental sustainability. Mainstreaming disaster management concerns into the development planning process. This is something which I just mentioned a few slides back. This is very important. Putting in place a streamlined institutional techno-legal framework in order to create and preserve the integrity of an enabling regulatory environment and a compliance regime. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Developing contemporary forecasting and early warning systems backed by responsive and fail-safe communications and information technology, IT support. I think this is something which is coming up very effectively. IMD and the other organizations who are in these areas need to be appreciated. Promoting a productive partnership with the media, NGOs, and the corporate sector in the areas of awareness generation and capacity development. Ensuring efficient response and relief with a caring human approach towards the vulnerable sections of the society. Making reconstruction an opportunity to rebuild, build back better, a concept introduced by UNDP for the Kerala flood disaster time, and construct a disaster resilient structures and habitats. Next slide, please. Now, we have talked about all these things. One will have a doubt that where is the local authority or local self-government in all this? Next slide. Yes, local authority or local self-government. Local authority includes Panchayati Raj institutions, municipalities, a district board, cantonment board, town planning authority, or Jilla Parishad, or any other body or authority by whatever name called for the time being, invested by law for rendering essential services or with the control and management of civic services within a specified local area. That is the local self-government. That is like from the bottom, if you look, we have the Grama Panchayats, and then grouping few Grama Panchayats together, we have a block Panchayat, and then we have the district Panchayat. Within this itself, we have the corporations and municipalities. So these are the local authorities or local self-government. That means in, for example, if you take any district, you will have a large number of governments, including that particular district government, right? Next slide, please. Now, responsibility of these local governments in disaster management. Local authorities should ensure that its officers and employees are trained in disaster management. This is a very serious responsibility. I do not know to what extent this is actually being done in our country in general. Local authorities should maintain resources related to disaster management so that it can be readily available at any time. Local authorities should ensure that all the construction projects under its jurisdiction conform the standards and specifications by national, state, and district authorities. Next slide, please. So, essentially, what in these slides I was trying to put across you is that there is no depth of rules or regulations or acts or similar to that. The only thing is that we are not in a position to get good success in its implementation stage. Now, what we are more concerned to see that in the implementation stage, many of these things which we have been telling, at least 50% of that is being practiced, then I think the problems which we are facing will not be there. Now, what are these 4 R's? Local authority should carry out these 4 R's. One is rescue, another is relief, a third is rehabilitation, and the fourth is the reconstruction. This is something which is directly connected with the disaster management. So essentially one has to rescue, another is give enough reliefs, and then the rehabilitate the people who have been dislocated, and for rehabilitating go for what sort of reconstruction in different forms like roads, bridges, houses, cyclone shelters, etc., etc., etc. Next slide, please. Now, the disaster management part, again, I am coming, where a continuous and integrated process of planning, organizing, coordinating, which we have seen earlier, need to be looked here again, in the sense that prevention of danger or threat of any disaster. So these things should be seen in the context of the points which I have explained in the earlier few slides. Mitigation or reduction of risk of any disaster or its severity or consequence. Capacity building. So there is enough rules and regulations and responsibilities and resources given to the local bodies to see that capacity building is necessarily done for the elected representatives, the key resource person who wanted to work in that, the different working groups who are there doing different works in that local body. So you can give any what all capacity building needed, you can give. Now, technologically speaking, any facilities you want to establish, all those things can be established in your local body, and the facilities can be extended to these people. Now, preparedness to deal with any disaster, the capability to deal with any disaster, prompt response to any threatening disaster situation or disaster, assessing the severity of magnitude of effects of any disaster, evacuation, rescue, rehabilitation, relief, etc. Next slide, please. So we have come to a situation that certain amount of awareness need to be created in the entire population. As Anilji, towards the end of his talk, was saying that disaster management is everybody's business. It is not only one section of people or one group of people. It becomes the citizen's problem. So it is the citizen who have to take initiative for this type of things. Now, where were the LSGs? We were talking about so many things earlier. Now we wanted to know, where were the LSGs? Are they hiding somewhere? Or are they seriously doing some work? Yes. During the 2020, different types of disasters, floods, landslides, earthquakes, cyclones, etc., prevailed in different states of India. And the countrywide COVID-19 pandemic, LHGs of all the states in India associated with their respective governments, NGOs, the health departments and affiliated departments and the community at large in announcing warning to rescue, relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction. That is all the force. So that is where the LSGs played a bigger role. I hope that we in Kerala had an experience which I was sharing in this slide. Hopefully, my impression is that Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, all these states were also having similar efforts in this. The next slide, please. Now, we are talking about the technology assistance at disaster sites. That is something which, what is the sort of technology assistance which can be given for disaster management in Kerala? Now, in recent times, technology has been largely employed to identify disaster affected areas, fast track disaster rescue and relief efforts. Drones, robots, scuba divers have been used to locate survivors at different situations and transmit information to the emergency teams for their timely help. They have also been used to drop humanitarian aids to many remote areas where accessibility happened to be poor because of the disaster affected roads, bridges, etc., etc. Now, ISRO supports with the different types of satellite data for disaster management. So, as far as India is concerned, we have a large technology assistance package which is available, which needs to be timely used by the concerned local self-governments as well as the respective governments. If it is the district government which is needed, so that district government to take initiative for it. But technology assistance is available. The next slide, please. Satellite. Another important thing, satellite remote sensing, GIS, GPS, that is geographical information system, and global positioning systems, and IT expertise. Preparation of disaster management plan, large scale usage of different types of satellite data are being used. GIS and GPS are nowadays. Smartphones are also largely used for online data collection. Large number of IT professionals are now involved in the disaster management cycle. Softwares like ArcGIS, ERDAS are used for generating different types of maps which are needed in a disaster situation. Next slide, please. Now, let us see. So we have seen what is a sort of technological gadgets and setup available in our country and how the local self-governments can judiciously take the help for their plan preparation. Now let us directly go to the local self-government's disaster management plan. All Grama Panchayats, GPs, that is Grama Panchayat, municipalities, corporations to prepare the disaster management plan. Like the state disaster management plan, like the district disaster management plan, we like the Grama Panchayat development plan, like the municipality development plan, like the corporation development plan, we have to prepare a respective disaster management plan also. Now, departments of local self-governments provided framework, templates, and guidelines. So, essentially, for the preparation of such plans, all required facilities are supplied. All SDMAs provide technical support wherever it is. See, I was talking about accessing the satellite data. So these satellites data can be accessed by the SDMA or DDMA and transferred to the respective city committees, city disaster management plan committees. Now, institutions meant for local self-government in each state responsibility for the capacity building and coordinating. That is the most important thing. Now, institution meant of LSD, that is the local self-government basically should have in a state level capacity training center, so that the resource person, that is the elected representatives, the people who are associated with these plan programs, the resource person, the key resource person, the local resource persons, all these people can be given timely training so that they can associate in their respective LSDs to help the plan preparation. The next slide, please. Yes, who actually did it? That is the most important. So I'm giving step-by-step process so that how it moves forward. Who actually did it? Disaster management plan under the leadership of local self-government steering committee. You know that the local self-governments are having steering committees with the support of working groups for environment, climate change, biodiversity, and disaster management. See, in Kerala, in addition to many of the working groups required for the LSD's plan preparation, development plan preparation, we have included working groups for environment, climate change, biodiversity, and disaster management. So 4 working groups have been additionally added, and people were selected and they were given training so that with their support, the plan, that is the development plan, will get a real feel of the disaster management plan also when it finally comes. But now this is only the beginning. Let us go to the next. Other sectoral working groups also to join. See, I was just telling you, there are so many other working groups. So those sectoral working groups will also, as and when their time comes, they will join. A group of 20 volunteers, that is the local resource groups. We call it as local resource group. If it is a Grama Panchayat, we'll have a group of 20 volunteers in every LSD to support a disaster management plan preparation. See, this is very important. At least 20 volunteers from each ward. You understand? So one Grama Panchayat will have at least about 10 to 15 wards. So here we are talking that 20 volunteers from each ward. So you just imagine the number of people who are associated. Then the NGOs, then the residents associations, and the neighborhood groups. Finally, the Kudumbasri. Kudumbasri is mostly our ladies who are contributing substantially for these activities. So it is a large number of people who are associating to formulate such a plan. So approximately, can you imagine how many people must have associated in the plan formulate the development plan of Kerala, and along with the disaster management plan for Kerala, for each Grama Panchayat and local self-governments and the state and the districts, approximately 3 lakh people. 3 lakh people. This is not a small thing. There are a lot of efforts need to be taken. So this is an exercise which we have been able to do in the last 25, 26 years. I don't claim that we have done everything perfect. No. But some good efforts are being taken so that some good results is being shown at selected places. Next slide, please.
Dr. Nair, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I will request you to conclude in another 5 minutes.
Oh, yes.
Because we are running short of time, so that's why.
Oh, yes. So now the working process. So the working process is basically with the working groups to conduct group discussions, collection, transit work, focus group discussions, etc. Then KSDMA, that the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority, provided around 31 layers of maps to every local self-government, analysis of data collected and maps, suggestions for disaster management plan, discussions in the Grama Sabhas, then special development seminar on disaster management plan. Yes, next please. Fast. Hello, next slide, please. Yes. Now, way forward, incorporating the different plans, the integration of the different plans, and disaster management plan to be sent to the DPC, District Planning Committee. The District Planning Committee vets it, and then it becomes a document for conducting the district level seminar. Then finally, it comes back to the District Disaster Management Authority. Next slide, please. Please, fast. Yes. So what are the outputs? So mitigation measures, preparedness, rescue, relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. The responsibilities, projects to be included in all the local self-governments, suggestions to other tiers of LSDs, departments, districts, administration, state governments. Next slide, please. Yes. To conclude, it may be noted that many of these disasters like earthquake, landslide, cyclones are similar, occurs often in poor transport facility locations. Hence, the accessibility to these areas becomes all the more troublesome for rescue and related activities. It is desirable to have a good understanding on the geography of the area where the activities are planned from rescue and rehabilitation point of view well in advance, with the assistance of DDMA, at least to locations where repeated disasters occur. Now, civil engineers, earth scientists with satellite remote sensing, GIS and GPS expertise, and IT professionals will have a greater role to play in the entire disaster management cycle. Sound knowledge on Disaster Management Act and its process of disaster management plan at various levels is very useful for a professionals, people's representatives of different levels dealing with the issues on disasters. Resource persons at all levels involved in the plan preparation must be specially trained in resource mapping with the cadastral maps. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to acknowledge this presentation has been largely drawn from the websites of Ministry of Home Affairs, National Disaster Management Authority, National Institute of Disaster Management of Government of India, and many research publications, including development, disaster plan reports of Grama, block, Jilla, and municipalities and corporations in our country. All of them are thanked profusely. Next slide, please. Thank you all. Thank you very much. I think I met your time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'm really sorry because we are running on the short on the time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have interrupted. Because your presentation was very interesting and very comprehensive and very elucidative as well. So you have very pointedly corrected out the role of the local governance bodies and how the engineers or the technical people would put their inputs for accessing the disaster risks and how to manage the disaster risk. We are very thankful for your session. I'm sure the participants would be quite beneficial this session. So thank you once again on behalf of the organizing team. Moving forward to our next session, which is on policy interventions and compliances at the local level for making cities safe. For this session, I would welcome Dr. Amit Prothi, sir, who is the Regional Director of Resilient Cities Network and a grantee of the Rockefeller Foundation. And in his career spanning nearly 25 years, he has worked across 12 countries with World Bank, ADP, and numerous government and private sector entities on urban resilience, including land use planning, flood management, and DRR. Recently, he is also responsible for the preparation of resilience strategies across several Asian cities, including Seoul and Chennai, and he is also currently serving as a global mentor on resilient infrastructure projects related to public open spaces and in two smart cities of India. So, with given his brief, I would welcome him for this session. And since our first two session has been on how we should involve community and what are the accessing tools, so this session is more on the issues that we face on the policy level at the local level. So we'll focus more on this. And I once again welcome Dr. Prothi and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me in IDM. I'm home. Hopefully I'm clear. The sound is clear. Everything is okay.
Yes, sir, everything is perfectly fine.
Very good. So I really appreciate being here. This topic of urban resilience is something that we've been thinking about for a long time. I will share my screen, and I really appreciate, Dr. Nair, what you started to talk about, linking the geography of a place and starting to understand, what kinds of risks that geography creates, and then how do you actually incorporate those risks in decisions. This is something that's quite fundamental to some of the work that we do. Let me just go to my next slide. I think by now all of us understand that disaster risks are continuing to increase. And in cities particularly, we are seeing a considerable amount of impact both on people and on economy. Dr. Nair talked about the Kerala case, but if you look at the 2015 flood in Chennai, there were 280 people lost. There was more than $1 billion of damage. And this is not unique to just our context, but this is starting to be seen or has been seen globally. So for example, in Paris 2016, the floods cost insurers between 900 million to 1.4 billion euros. And the numbers keep adding up. And what we are starting to recognize is that by the end of this century, these risks are continuing to increase, and risks which we hadn't thought about. For example, we're sitting in the middle of a pandemic. I don't think we had given so much consideration to this risk. Similarly, the notion of extreme heat, we aren't really talking about heat, but every year the planet is heating up and cities are actually getting hotter and hotter. And we start to see these risks being felt in cities, and these risks will become disasters at some point if they are not already disasters. So people have estimated that cities lose already approximately a quarter of their GDP to disasters. This century, the 21st century, it's really, there's convergence of three trends that are continuing to increase this risk of disaster. We know about urbanization. I think that's not new in the Indian context. We don't think a whole lot about globalization, but the pandemic, if you think about it, is actually partly linked to globalization. And why is that? Is that cities are actually connected to each other. And we see the spread of the pandemic, for example, it may have started at Wuhan, but people got on a plane and connected to other cities and started to spread. So globalization cities such as Cape Town from South Africa that are part of this network. We have cities such as London. We have cities such as Seoul in South Korea. We have cities such as Mexico City and Buenos Aires. We have cities such as Washington, D.C., etc. And what that allows us to do really is to look at urban resilience across cities, not just within a country. And what we often find is that issues that cities are facing sometimes are similar across boundaries rather than within boundaries. It depends on size, it depends on municipal capacity, it depends on what level of understanding of risk there exists in the cities. And having close to 100 cities that are part of this network allows us to then understand what kinds of solutions are working. How do we actually promote resilience in the urban context? So what is our core program? Our core program of really helping cities understand resilience has been built around four key pillars. We spend a lot of time establishing a position of a chief resilience officer. Now, there's a lot of discussion before this as to whose mandate is it at the local level to understand disasters? Is it at the city level? Is it at the district level? And we find that's not unique just to the Indian context. That happens across other cities as well, where there is no chief disaster officer, or there is no chief resilience officer. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 6 years really creating a position for a person and an office whose main job really is to work across departments and start to understand how do you integrate risk and resilience in decisions of other city government officials, and how do you start working outside the city government with external partners such as universities, such as the private sector, such as NGOs. And this individual and this office really has become a pivotal person or a point person for coordinating on conversations around resilience. And then what that has also allowed us to do is that all of these member cities, there is an individual who's trusted amongst the city network. So people from one city know the chief resilience officers from other cities, and they're able to then communicate and learn from each other as to what one city or the other city might be doing around certain specific risk areas. So chief resilience officer has been incredibly important. The second component has been a resilience strategy. And again, I think Dr. Nair, you talked about the number of people who are engaged in the Kerala context. For us also, the resilience strategy process is not necessarily about a technical document. It's really been about bringing stakeholders together. And we have something like 200, 300, 400 people in each city who actually participated in developing a resilience strategy. And if you go to our website, all of our, we have 82 cities that have published strategies at this point. They're all available publicly. So anybody can go and download and just see what is the city trying to do when they're talking about resilience. We do help our city network with tools and capacity building. That's critical to our work. We have tools that actually help cities understand what is risk. What is a risk for a particular piece of infrastructure? What is risk for people? What is risk for a variety of contexts? So we actually come up with those tools, and then we do a lot of capacity building. And the last bit, which cannot be really ignored, is the power of the network. The shared learning amongst cities has been incredibly important. And I wanted to emphasize these 4 points, talk about it's not easy to make changes we all want to make. And I think that's the key. It's not easy to shift the development. We're focused on development, and we need to shift that. It's not easy to shift that. And for us, these 4 categories are helping at least to make a difference on the ground. So when I talk about chief resilience officer, we have been very careful in identifying individuals. In San Francisco, it's the director of capital planning who's actually also the chief resilience officer. So he has spent for the last 3 years understanding what does risk mean in the context of that city, and then any capital planning investments that they're coming up with, he's trying to make sure that the investment in infrastructure actually incorporates decisions that relate to risk. So, mainstreaming the thinking of resilience into capital planning. So that's one individual. The second individual here is from the city of Seoul. This is the deputy mayor for Public Safety Bureau. His mandate is public safety. Now, his title as a chief resilience officer also means that he's working with the other cities in the network to understand how does Seoul go beyond just building infrastructure and starting to build more infrastructure that offers more multiple benefits. So again, and then he's a deputy mayor, so he has the ability to influence policy. Similarly, in Belfast, one of the commissioners is appointed as the commissioner for resilience, and Buenos Aires, it's the director, this general director for strategic management, who's also the chief resilience officer. And all these four individuals are actually well connected to the network, but also to each other. So they can reach out. Buenos Aires has an issue around earthquake risk, or Seoul has an issue around earthquake risk. They can actually reach out to our city network in Japan and say, what are you doing around incorporating technology in your buildings? How can you help? So the network allows those kinds of conversations to happen. Planning for resilience, this is about the strategy process. And again, we have a very, very clear methodology where we haven't looked, when we talk about urban resilience, we don't look at it just as DRR. We look at it in a much more holistic manner. And what we try to do is we try to understand in each city, what are the risks you're facing. So I've got an example from Sydney here, where in the strategy process, they identified, the major shocks that the city faces, of Sydney faces, relates to extreme weather, relates to infrastructure failure, relates to financial institution failure, water crises, digital network failure, terrorism, pandemic, cyber attack. So all of these have been categorized as shocks which can lead to disasters in the context of Sydney. And it's not just about shocks. We also recognize that when you have city systems that are stressed, those can actually lead to becoming a disaster. And we saw that our health systems at the local level were stretched. Those were existing stresses that existed in the system. And when a pandemic hit, they could fail easily because they were not very robust. So what are those stresses that when there's a pressure on that certain system, it can fail very quickly? So for example, in the Sydney context, the demand on health services, housing affordability. Now, why would housing affordability be a stress? But the reality is, if you don't have adequate affordable housing, you have people who are traveling further and further away. And there are increased risks that are created in the system when that starts happening. Issues of social cohesion is a stress. Employment, not having diversity in employment is a stress. Now, why is that a problem? We see that today, where the city of Bangkok or the city of Da Nang in Vietnam are really struggling because their economies have failed because they were completely dependent on tourism. A pandemic hits and it becomes a disaster because you did not have enough diversity in your employment system. So the stress was around diversity in employment, and that has now resulted in quite a significant amount of failure in cities that were completely dependent on tourism during this during this pandemic. So again, the link between stress and shock is something we try to highlight through the strategy process. And then there's several others, and we have a whole lot of list of these shocks and stresses that we actually try cities to map out when we start this process of doing resilience. And then on the right, you just see, the cities that are actually gone through this process. New Orleans went through it, Mexico City, Rotterdam, etc. So the process of developing the strategy, there's a clear methodology, there's a clear engagement process, and it's incredibly stakeholder driven. We also focus a lot on capacity building. I think we all recognize that we don't have a very good understanding of disaster. We don't actually have a very good understanding of why systems fail, and particularly when there's linkages between systems. And I think in the urban context, that's incredibly important because urban is complex. And if we can start to understand different systems and how they interact with each other, we can start to address the problem in a little bit more manner. So we spend a lot of time trying to, for example, in Manchester, Greater Manchester, we focused on the aging population. Similarly, in the Japanese cities, the issue of aging population has come out strongly as a key stress in their system. So we're trying to give them advice as to what should they be thinking about the aging population. Now that can be around vulnerability from loneliness, the mental health issues. But right now for the pandemic, you clearly see in the elderly population who were not well connected to others could have actually faced a lot more significant challenges during this particular pandemic. So our capacity building includes, coming up with technical and knowledge products related to the stresses and shocks that cities are facing. And the fourth one around the global network, we really emphasize a lot on peer-to-peer learning. So it's less about Amit going into a city and saying you need to do A, B, and C and D. It's a lot more about city representatives talking to each other and having a forum where they're starting to say, okay, this is my problem. How have you looked at it? So this collective peer learning between cities is something we emphasize a lot. And I just wanted to share this example from, Cape Town, when last year or 2 years back now, there was everybody was reading the news around day zero in Cape Town where they were about to run out of water. And we helped the city actually organize a forum. And through that, we brought in technical experts, other cities, and World Bank, University of Massachusetts as a technical partner, Arup as a technical expert, a lot of different partners to come and start to say, what are the urgent things that city needs to do? And these kinds of agents we find incredibly important for cities to actually, it's not just a policy change. It's about understanding why the policy, but understand how do you start to implement that policy. And we find it's less about the technical expertise is part of it, but peer-to-peer learning actually goes much further in convincing cities to actually do something. And then on the bottom, you see some examples kinds of so one right in the middle, which has the blue and green graph on it, it's actually saying if you look at the issue of flash flooding, the extreme left, and you don't look at it from its linkage to other risks, you're not actually understanding the risk completely. So while you may have flash flood, you may be looking at it just from an asset point of view. There may be other issues that are linked to that flash flood, which you haven't considered, and you need to start considering them. So we help cities make those linkages between different risks. I wanted to share some examples now, and I think this one, Dr. Nar, goes exactly to your point. So New York Times had a very interesting set of GIS maps after there was a major flood in the city of Houston. And these two images, if you can see them, on the left is an image from 1992, which shows an area that had major flooding by the river. Now that area is completely vacant. There's no development, nothing there. In 2016, same area had the same flood, except now there are a lot more people living there and a lot more houses built there. So same river, same level of flooding, except now we've put people and assets in that place, which means we've actually created the condition for the damage, for the impact both on people and assets. And the point they were trying to make is really we need to start understanding risks better and make better decisions at the local level where we're avoiding these places which are more risk prone. And what we have done is we've actually partnered with some of like for example, on the right, I've got an example from Da Nang, where we worked with CSIRO, which is a research entity out of Australia who came in and who looked at two neighborhoods and who did a housing assessment to understand, how vulnerable were those houses to a major storm. Da Nang is a coastal city. It actually faces a lot of storm activity. Those storm activities are increasing because of climate change. So they said, let's look at these two neighborhoods and understand what is the housing typology and what is the risk to storms. And then on the far right on top, you see there's a hotspot of, they said, okay, not everything across this neighborhood is actually at risk. The risk is concentrated in certain locations. And what that means is for the government to then come in and invest in improvement, they're making it with a much more nuanced understanding of, I don't actually have to invest across this whole area, but I actually have to invest in this kind of housing typology, which is then much, much more resource efficient. So the idea was, understand the risk, understand what, is it widespread, is it concentrated, and then how do you actually come in with a program that addresses that risk, where you're not just going and spreading the money everywhere, but you're saying, let's focus on this kind of housing, and also understanding that, as the wind speed increases, which can, be increased. So again, the intention really was to understand the risk and then start using it for making a safer environment for people who live there. And so we've done this in other cities as well, where we've brought in technical partners to actually do this kind of technical work on the ground, and then helping to translate that into investment programs. And there's a whole new, body of knowledge which is called risk-sensitive land use planning. And I think again, Dr. Nair, you talked about this, but this is really about making spatial decisions based on an understanding of risk. And this graph, this table on hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and risk is very important to understand actually, because not everything becomes a disaster. Just because you're located in a certain place doesn't mean you actually will have a disaster. It's just there is a natural hazard, or there is a hazard. So that you need to understand what that is. You need to understand who is exposed to that. Like the Vietnam example that I just showed, not every house is going to fall if the wind speed goes above 100 kilometers an hour. Only certain houses will fall. So while all of the neighborhood was exposed in that case, not every house was vulnerable. First of all, we need to understand what are the hazards. What are the hazards? In that context, who is exposed to what? Within that context, what is the vulnerability? Just because you're exposed to something doesn't mean you're actually vulnerable. And then in that context, you understand the risk and then are making decisions accordingly. So the top right graphic is really a schematic to say, in your urban master plans, city plans, etc., if you can start to take this perspective of risk-sensitive land use planning, what you can start to probably do is understand which areas need to be avoided or where development needs to be limited, and which areas actually are okay for development. And why is that important? We see that from this, the city of Bangkok in 2011. There was a major flood in Bangkok that affected supply chains globally. Why? Because a lot of the industries were located in completely flood-prone areas. This is the same situation that happens in Chennai. This is the same situation that happens in a lot of other cities. Our airports get flooded because they're located in the wrong place. Our industries are getting located in places where they're more prone to disasters. And those impacts are felt for a long time. So again, sorry, please go on mute. So this notion of risk-sensitive land use planning is incredibly important, and it's not being done. I mean, I think to be fair, this is not being done, and this has to be done if we want to change how we are developing. Because if we don't, we are just putting more and more, assets, people, etc., in risk-prone areas. And the bottom right, I just wanted to show, so once you have an understanding of risk, once you have an understanding of So in this case, this is the city of Sydney, and you see these people on the ground. They're actually sitting on top of a flood map. So what they did is they mapped out the flood, and they said, in our city, this particular river will flood, around this much, and they've mapped it out. And all of these people who are sitting around that map are actually asset managers. So somebody who has a hospital, somebody who is part of the power grid, somebody who's part of the water system, they're actually looking at that map and saying, hey, wait a minute, if there is a flood, my power grid is going to break down. And if my power grid breaks down, your hospital will not have power. So what can we do about understanding, not only those assets at risks, but also how those assets are connected to each other? So this kind of methodology is really about helping make better decisions with an understanding of risk. And what we also try to do is we try to help, bring some innovation through our network. So this is an example from the city of Paris, where the city has something like 700 schools, and the city has understood that they are actually going to be facing more and more urban heat. And they recognize that they actually don't have the capacity to just, it's not an energy solution. It's not a solution that they can just address urban heat easily. But what they recognize is they have these assets that are the schools. Now, what they're doing is within these assets, they've said, we are going to green up these assets. And by taking each school and adding green space in a variety of ways, what they're trying to do is they're trying to cool down the heat. And if you look at that GIS map, just below the photograph, if each school contributes a little bit to its neighborhood, you suddenly see that there's actually a lot of green that has been added to the city. Now, it's not just about adding green. It's also about, they said, we will open these schools because these schools are air conditioned. We'll open these schools when there's a very hot day, because we understand that in our neighborhood, there are certain people who actually cannot be in a cool environment. So we will allow our facility, our asset that exists, to become these centers where people can come and stay. So again, this is not something that's requires a whole lot of new infrastructure use that actually reduces risks to citizens. And one thinks that this is only in the case of Paris, but frankly, we're trying to do the same thing in Chennai, where we're saying, can we, a lot of us on this call probably, for us, roof gardens and potted plants is something we've grown up with. I grew up in Delhi. My mother had a potted plant on the terrace, right? I mean, a lot of us have had this ability to actually green our little microcosm of our environment. But when you start adding it up and you start to understand that actually, if you create a lot more green roofs, if you create a lot of green spaces, if you start to use that as productive landscapes. So for example, start to grow vegetables and fruits. You can do a bunch of different things. You can actually help cool down the environment a little bit. You can help with water management a little bit, because you create a lot more softer surfaces that are reducing the amount of water flowing into your stormwater drains. You're also creating food security. And especially during this pandemic, we recognize how important it is to have some level of food security, because we had supply chain disruptions, prices of food went up. And in the city system, we are completely reliant on food coming from outside the city. So by adding these, urban horticulture and initiatives within the city context, you're also actually helping build more food security. And the last thing here is you're actually helping provide jobs to people who are actually, low income in your community. So the skills, the Tamil Nadu Skill Development Department is actually interested in this initiative and is planning to take this forward as a skills development initiative. So again, the space exists. What doesn't exist is a way to look at what can you do that as an intervention that then incorporates other benefits. And urban horticulture, we find, is something that's quite interesting that we'll continue to push for in our urban context. We also use another methodology for bringing in innovation. So we actually partnered with the Dutch government, where they ran a global competition to see, can you look at water as a transformative system in a city? We only look at water as a problem. And can you think about water in a way which is not a problem, but which actually creates, more, helps to reduce our risks? And there were a lot of different ideas that came out. We did this in Chennai, Semarang, and Khulna. And Chennai, I think all of us in this audience probably recognizes that, we've had historically all of these temple tanks, and all of these tanks in our urban city. Bangalore has this, Chennai has this. These tanks used to function both from a flood mitigation point of view as well as a water security point of view. So people actually relied on these tanks for reducing the flooding in their neighborhoods, because the tanks collected the water. And that also became water supply when there was shortage in the system. So the tanks were actually incredibly important for reducing the risk from water in the city. Now we've forgotten that. We've built our modern pipes and both the stormwater drains and the supply systems, and we've kind of, these tanks are lying as vacant land, and as they're getting, they don't have a purpose, they're getting redeveloped. So people are actually filling them up and building, using this as property that they can build on. Now, what that has also done is that's increased the risk, because it's actually not allowing flood waters to go anywhere. So now you either build a larger drain or you face a flood. And so in this context, the idea really is not a new idea, is can we link these tanks back to the water management system for the city? And this is being recognized by the Green Climate Fund, for example, is now interested to put in money to see if this idea can be developed further. There's a climate action forum happening this next week in Holland, where you've got the World Bank, UNDP, all of the big players. This will be presented there. So again, it's relinking it's understanding your urban system in a way where you may actually already have a system that you need to reconnect to reduce your risk. So we try to sort of what we call break silos through some kind of innovative approaches and methodologies, and then we try to share that across networks. Peer-to-peer learning, I mentioned this, but Rotterdam is considered to be one of the best in the world when it comes to water management. The Dutch have been, they are underwater if you actually look at them geographically, and they've figured out ways to actually stay, have a robust economy and have places despite being actually below sea level. And what that has resulted is that they are one of the best when it comes to water management. And so through our network, we actually have paired cities to help understand how do they need to innovate in the water management space. So for example, on the left, you have two images. The image on top is, you look at it, it's a basketball court. It's really a basketball court. And when you look at the image below, it's the same area, but it actually holds water when there's excess water in the system. So what they've created is they've created a multi-purpose space. And this is just an example, but the city is completely filled with these kinds of multiple spaces where they have figured out how much water they need to store when it rains, and they've figured out how to reduce that water from entering the system where it doesn't become a problem. So now this thinking around an innovative space is something we've actually helped bring to Surat, where Surat engineers are working with Rotterdam engineers to understand how should they be looking at their flood risk. And in this case, they've gotten all excited about this water plaza and actually building a water plaza in Surat, which will serve similar multiple functions. This is just an example of how cities within the network actually have shared learning and are helping to create a safer place for residents in other cities. And we do create, our network tries to encourage peer-to-play learning. So with the pandemic, for example, now, we have now partnered with the World Bank for the last year. And on a bi-weekly basis, and it used to be on a weekly basis, we have brought together experts from the World Bank's network and city experts from our networks to actually take a certain perspective on the pandemic and link to city. And we've got around 40 different, discussion points now where this is all available online, where it's about how do you use technology for understanding hotspots, how do you communicate around risk, how do you deal with a aging population in your city, and what is the link to resilience, link to the pandemic. And through this discussion, we are also creating a platform for cities to come together to see how do they recover. What do they do going forward? Pandemic is, hopefully not going to last beyond a year. But what do they need to do? Their economies are shattered. They're facing a lot of challenges, and we've created a platform for and are putting together methods where then cities can come and say, how do we go forward from here? And Belfast has just released, a one-year plan for post-COVID recovery. So it's literally like, what does the city need to do in the next year? So again, trying to help cities. We are at a certain crisis moment. Cities are looking to get out of it, and we're trying to create a platform for how cities can actually come together to move beyond that. And in the Indian context, I think I wanted to highlight that we set up the first urban resilience unit at NIUA. There was nothing called there was no concept of resilience in the city discussion, and we actually set up with Rockefeller Foundation funds the first urban resilience unit at NIUA, which has been advocating to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs on what does it need to do around resilience. And that has now evolved into the Climate Center for Cities, which some of you may be familiar with. And they continue to be active in our network, learning lessons, picking up examples from other cities, building their capacity building programs, using the access to our cities, trying to, again, build a better understanding in this case of climate risk in cities and what can cities do around it. So that's been something we are really proud of doing in the Indian context. With that, I think I'll stop. I've already reached my time, I think. So thank you everyone for listening to me.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. And it was very comprehensive presentation, and explaining very beautifully how we should be understanding the risks and how we should be incorporating resilience in development initiatives, and for giving us a very way forward, that is very innovative way forward, that we have to break through the silos and adopt a multi-stakeholder approach through shared learning. Further, you have also suggested that 4 components that is very much essential. Those are the chief resilience officer should be there in every cities, and there should be a chief resilience strategy as well. Similarly, we should have a connection with the global network, and obviously the tools and capacity building. With this, I would once again thank you, and I would further go ahead with concluding the previous 2 sessions for our participants, so that they can have the key takeaways of this training workshop. So we have talked about redefining and revisiting the existing policies and the existing act of disaster management, which needs to be revisited given the present complications, whether it is the pandemic complications or other urban complex emergencies. And similarly, a recommendation of municipal disaster risk body has been suggested by Mr. Sinha, which is, again, there has been a discussion on your session as well. Further, Dr. A.S. Nair has very beautifully put how we have to need to understand our geography and our climate for understanding the disaster risks and for planning for disaster resilience. And the solutions for the existing urban risks can lead to reducing the vulnerabilities. That is also one of the priorities that we need to look, that we have to reduce the existing stresses and the existing issues for reducing the urban vulnerabilities. So these are some of the major key takeaways. With that, I would conclude today's training workshop. Before that, I would like to place a vote of thanks to all the dignitaries. Sri Anil Sinha, former Vice Chairman, Bihar State Disaster Management Authority; Dr. A.S. Nair, Emeritus Scientist and Program Director, Center for Environment and Development; and Dr. Amit Proti, Regional Director of Global Resilient Cities Network; I would also like to extend my thanks to Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, sir, Executive and Director NIDM, and Shri Raviranjan Guru, Deputy Director General of AIILSG, and our conveners, Professor Santosh Kumar and Mr. Gagan Sinha. I would also like to thank the coordinators, Mr. Abhishek Pandey, Dr. Anuradha Maurya, and as well as the IT support team, Mr. Ashley, and all the participants for their patient hearing and participation. Thank you all. With that, I would conclude today's training workshop. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.